Okay, get this. So you've been sailing for months, right? Across the ocean, no idea what you're going to find. And all of a sudden, out of the mist, this city appears.
A city on a lake.
Yeah. And there are these pyramids, just huge, reaching for the sky. I mean, that's got to be a crazy experience,
I
right?
can't even imagine.
That's what happened to the Spanish when they found Tenochtitlan, the center of the Aztec Empire.
Hmm.
It's a story of like total awe, but also this huge culture clash, and then, well, conquest. We're going to go back to that time, see what those first few months were like for them.
Sounds fascinating. Where do we even begin with something like that?
Well, we have this guy, Bernal Diaz del Castillo. He was one of the conquistadors who was actually there, wrote about the whole thing.
A first-hand account.
Yeah, and it's super vivid. It's like you're right there with him.
That's incredible. I mean, talk about a primary source. But we have to remember he's writing from his own perspective, right?
Of course, it's like reading someone's travel diary. You know, you get the raw, immediate impressions, but also their own biases, their way of seeing things.
Exactly.
So, okay, first impressions. Diaz is blown away by Tenochtitlan. Says it's like nothing he's ever seen before. Compares it to Constantinople, even Rome.
Wow, those were like the ultimate cities back then. For a Spaniard, at least.
Right. And what really gets him is how organized and clean the city is. He talks about the layout, the canals, the marketplace at Tlatelolco.
Tlatelolco, that was the big one, right? Where they traded everything.
Oh, yeah, goods from all over the empire. Diaz goes on and on about the variety of stuff, the system of weights and measures, even the officials making sure everything's fair.
You know what's interesting to me? It seems like they were really impressed by that. The marketplace, I mean. It suggests a level of, like, sophistication they maybe weren't expecting.
Yeah, it kind of challenges that whole idea that the Aztecs were primitive. Their society was super organized.
Complex government, trade, social hierarchy.
Oh, and the Diaz describes climbing the Great Temple, 114 steps to the top.
Can you imagine the anticipation, the view from up there, this whole city sprawling beneath you?
I know. And then they finally reach the top, have this audience with the emperor, Montezuma.
But that's where things take a turn, like a really dark turn. Diaz describes the statue of Huitzilopochtli, the Aztec god of war.
Oh, yeah, covered in jewels and gold, but also all these carvings, serpents, and human faces.
And there were braziers filled with, well, smoldering human hearts.
Yeah, the walls were covered in blood. The stench must have been overwhelming. I mean, this was a culture where human sacrifice was a core part of their religion.
Totally different worldview, right. The Spanish were horrified, thought it was barbaric, demonic.
But we have to try to understand the Aztecs. They believed that human sacrifice was necessary. It was how they appeased the gods, kept the whole cosmos in balance. The heart was the most sacred offering.
Nourishing the sun, ensuring life continued.
So you have this crazy contrast. On the one hand, the Spanish are blown away by how grand and organized the city is.
And on the other hand, they're totally freaked out by what they're seeing in the temple.
It's like this clash of worldviews,
Yeah.
and it sets the stage for everything that's going to happen next. But it also makes you wonder, how did the Aztecs see the Spanish? I mean, here come these pale guys with their weird weapons and their even weirder beliefs.
Yeah, were they invaders or something else?
I've even heard this theory that Montezuma didn't see them as a threat at first. Maybe more like, well, exotic specimens.
Hold on, like he collected weird stuff.
Exactly. Montezuma was famous for having this huge collection of exotic animals and people.
Mm.
So maybe he just saw the Spanish as, something new and interesting to add to his collection.
Like part of his giant zoo. That's a wild theory.
It is, right. But it would explain why he tolerated them at first. Maybe he was more curious than afraid, watching them, trying to figure out where they fit into his world.
So instead of a conquering army, he saw them as, what, interesting oddities?
It's a possibility. It definitely challenges how we usually think about the Spanish arrival. As this immediate conquest. Makes it more complicated, more nuanced. There's curiosity, there's this power dynamic, there's just plain cultural misunderstanding.
I do think.
Okay, so let's say Montezuma did see them as guests, even curiosities. When does it change? When do things go from observation to conflict?
Well, even though they were treated well, the Spanish, they couldn't help themselves. Driven by gold, convinced they were superior, they started pushing their luck.
Diaz talks about how they got rowdy, started stealing gold, melting it down, basically showing zero respect. You can just feel the tension rising.
Yeah, their actions just chip away at whatever goodwill there might have been.
And it all comes to a head when Montezuma gets news that more Spaniards have landed on the coast.
Uh-oh.
And this time, they're not Cortez's buddies. They've been sent to arrest him for disobeying orders.
Wow, talk about pressure. Cortez is already walking a tightrope into Tenochtitlan, trying to keep things under control while his men are getting more and more restless, and now he's got a threat from his own side.
It's a total mess. So what does he do? How do you even get out of a situation like that?
Well, Cortez, always up for a challenge, makes some really bold moves that have huge consequences.
Okay, you gotta tell me more.
First, he takes Montezuma hostage.
What? The emperor? That's insane. How does that even work?
Diaz says it was tense, a real standoff. Cortez and his guys confront Montezuma, tell him he has to come with them. They threaten him, say if he resists, if he calls for help, they'll kill him.
And Montezuma just goes along with it, the ruler of this powerful empire.
Well, according to Diaz, yeah. After some hesitation, Montezuma agrees to go, says it's a friendly visit.
Come on, that's a little hard to believe. Is there another explanation?
Some historians think this whole thing, Montezuma being a prisoner, might be a story the Spanish made up, to justify their actions later on, to make it seem like they were already in control.
So Cortez could be twisting the truth, making himself look like this brilliant strategist when really he's just trying to cover his own butt. But either way, taking the emperor hostage is a huge escalation.
For sure, it sets the stage for more conflict.
And that's not even the end of it. Cortez does something else, something even more reckless. He splits up his army.
He divides his forces. Isn't that like rule number one in war? Never divide your forces, especially when you're outnumbered.
Exactly. But Cortez was a gambler. He leaves a small group with Pedro de Alvarado to guard Montezuma in Tenochtitlan, while he takes the rest to fight the Spanish on the coast.
He's fighting a war on two fronts. That's crazy brave, or maybe just crazy.
It's a huge risk, right? By dividing his forces, he could lose control of everything. The situation in Tenochtitlan, the threat from his own people.
And that's where we'll leave it for now.
Join us next time as we explore what happens next. The consequences of Cortez's gamble. The events that led to one of the biggest clashes of civilizations in history.
So last time, we left Cortez marching off to the coast, remember? Leaving a city on edge and a captive emperor in the hands of Pedro de Alvarado.
Yeah, splitting his forces like that, it seems super risky. But hey, that was Cortez, always pushing the limits. So what happened when he met those other Spaniards? Did they fight?
Actually, Cortez was not just bold, he was a brilliant strategist. He knew how the Spanish military worked, used their weaknesses to his advantage, like their thirst for adventure, for gold, their dislike of authority even. Somehow he turned what could have been a battle into a way to strengthen his own army.
Wait, so he convinced them to join him?
Pretty much, yeah. He brought a lot of those soldiers over to his side, got more resources, more men, a real display of leadership, you know, really cunning.
Wow. But back in Tenochtitlan, things were going very differently, right? With Alvarado in charge, that guy had a reputation.
Right. Impulsive, brutal even. And those tendencies, well, they really came out during the Aztec festival of Toxcatl.
Foxcatl, refresh my memory. What was that all about?
Month-long celebration for Tezcatlipoca, one of their most important gods. Rituals, feasting, and of course, sacrifice.
And that's where Alvarado really messed up. Diaz tells the whole story, even though he wasn't there himself. He heard it from others who were.
Yeah, Alvarado, he panicked. You know, misunderstood the rituals, thought the Aztecs were about to revolt, decided to take what he called preemptive action.
Preemptive action meaning?
Castilla ordered a massacre, stormed the great temple where the Aztecs were celebrating, and just slaughtered them. Hundreds of people, unarmed men, women, children.
Oh my God, that's awful. Just imagine the terror.
It was a turning point. Any trust that existed between the Spanish and the Aztecs, it was gone.
So Cortez comes back from his victory on the coast, walks right into this nightmare.
Yeah, he finds the city under siege. The Aztecs, they're furious, filled with grief. They're attacking the Spanish quarters, cutting off their supplies, fighting like cornered animals. Cortez's gamble blew up in his face.
What a reversal. So what does he do? I mean, how do you fix something like that?
Yeah. Cortez, he realizes how bad it is, tries to make peace. Orders Montezuma, who's still his prisoner, to talk to the people from the palace roof. Imagine that scene. The emperor, surrounded by his captors, begging his own people to stop fighting.
That's heartbreaking. Did it work? Did they listen?
Not a chance. They were too angry, too hurt. They saw Montezuma as a traitor, a puppet of the Spanish.
So what happened to him?
He was hit with stones, arrows by his own people.
Killed by his own people. Tragic. He was just trying to survive an impossible situation.
It is. Some accounts say he died right there. Others say he died from his wounds a few days later. But either way, that was it. Any hope for peace was over. It was all-out war now. And the Spanish, they were fighting just to stay alive.
Cortez, his men, trapped, surrounded by a furious Aztec army. Their leader dead, their dreams of gold turning to dust. What happens next?
They had to get out of there. Cortez makes another desperate move, escape under cover of darkness.
Seriously? Sneak out of the city with the whole Aztec army out there. Sounds like a suicide mission.
It was a last resort. But the Aztecs, they were ready for them. They knew those streets, those canals. They knew the Spanish were weighed down by their armor, all the treasure they'd stolen. What happened that night became known as La Noche Triste, the Night of Sorrows.
It doesn't sound good.
It was a massacre. The Spanish, they couldn't move quickly enough, easy targets. Hundreds were killed, their bodies thrown in the canals, their dreams of riches sinking along with them.
So Cortez, the great conquistador, the guy who seemed unbeatable, he runs away, defeated.
It was a crushing defeat, humiliating for the Spanish. But Cortez, he was nothing, if not stubborn. He lost a lot, faced so many setbacks, but he was determined to come back and finish what he started.
The story's not over yet. Cortez survives, and now he's coming back for Tenochtitlan. So Cortez limps away from Tenochtitlan, defeated, after that horrific night of sorrows. But he's not done yet, is he?
Not by a long shot. He retreats to Tlaxcala, remembers those allies he made, a safe place to recover and plan his comeback.
Smart move, using those alliances. I mean, he couldn't have taken on the Aztecs alone, right? The Tlaxcalans, they were key.
Oh, totally. They wanted to be free of the Aztecs, saw the Spanish as their chance to finally break free. Cortez was smart enough to see how important that was. Couldn't have done it without them, that's for sure.
So he's in Tlaxcala, licking his wounds, figuring out his next move. He must have known another direct attack on Tenochtitlan was suicide.
He wasn't stupid. He learned from that disaster. This time, he came up with a new plan. More subtle, more strategic. It wasn't just about brute force anymore.
So what was the plan? Hit them where it hurts.
Exactly. Cut off their supply routes, starve them out. Plus, he knew the Aztec Empire wasn't all one big, happy family. Lots of internal rivalries. He used that to his advantage, turned them against each other.
Classic divide and conquer.
Exactly. But here's the craziest part. He decided to build a fleet of warships.
Warships? In the middle of Mexico. Hold on, how did that even work?
Brigantines, they're called. He actually had his men take apart one of the ships they brought from Cuba, carry it piece by piece all the way to Tlaxcala.
Are you serious? That's incredible.
Yeah, they used local materials, worked with the indigenous people, built 13 of these brigantines, and it worked. They controlled Lake Texcoco, surrounded Tenochtitlan, no more supplies, plus they could attack from the water. Game changer.
Okay, so Cortez has got his new fleet, his allies, a new plan. Round 2, here we come. What was that final assault like?
Brutal. A siege that lasted months, constant bombardment from the brigantines, the Tlaxcalans attacking on land. The Aztecs, they fought hard, but they were outmatched.
Yeah, they were great warriors, but against Spanish weapons, those tactics, it was a losing battle.
And that siege, man, it just wore them down, not just physically, but mentally, too.
I bet. Stuck in that city, under attack, no food, people dying all around you. Must have been terrifying.
It was a war of attrition, broke their spirit in the end.
And finally, Tenochtitlan falls.
August 13th, 1521. The last Aztec emperor, Cuauhtémoc, he surrenders to Cortez. The Aztec Empire, one of the greatest civilizations in the Americas, is gone.
It's a turning point in history. The Spanish conquest of Mexico changed everything.
It makes you think, doesn't it? About conquest, about how cultures clash, about the role of technology, disease, about how individuals can shape history, but also how history shapes them.
From that first moment of awe to the horrors of the massacre, Cortez's crazy risks, and finally the fall of Tenochtitlan. It's a story that grabs you, makes you question everything.
And it reminds us that the past, it's not really past, is it? It's still with us.
Well, that's it for our deep dive into the Spanish arrival in Tenochtitlan. We'll be back soon with more stories from the past. Until then, keep exploring, keep asking questions.